I've got with me Dr. Adrian Warman from IBM Cloudant in one of a series of interviews I'm doing on behalf of the ISTC, the Institute of Scientific and Technical Communicators, about different types of technical communicators and what they do. So Adrian, thank you for your time today. So I think it would be good to start off with by finding out.
Sorry, Alice, I ought to interrupt. It looks like my camera's just gone off.
Right.
Can you still see me?
You're static at the moment.
Yeah, the light's gone out on my camera, which is very annoying.
I think you have to do something at your.
There we go.
Yes, there you are. That's okay. There may well be technical hitches along the way, all of the way, and just adjust myself down as well. Yes, it'd be useful to understand who you're currently working for, because it was IBM, it's now IBM Cloudant, if I'm
That's
right.
Right. Yes, yes. So the quick summary is that Cloudant was an organisation that was started a few years ago to develop a database as a service application using cloud technology. We can talk a little bit more about that shortly. But the key point about it is that it was acquired by IBM just about a year ago, beginning of 2014. Cloudant is part of the IBM Cloud and Analytics portfolio. We do an awful lot of very interesting stuff in terms of cloud data services and so on. It's an organization that is, Cloudant itself is based in the States, over in Boston, and is now part of the much larger IBM family and getting involved in all of the different products and services that IBM provide.
So how many, I don't think you, so IBM as a company has got thousands of staff. Cloudant, is it tiny, medium size? How many people would you say are?
It's as a result of the acquisition, there are more people now. So if you were to say that within the Cloudant organisation, you've got the order of 60 to 100 people, as compared to IBM, which is, as you say, in the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. And excuse me, your role within the organisation and your job title as well. Can you? Because yes, let's start with that. If you could, what job title do you have, and what's your role within what Cloudant do within the role of database as a service?
Okay, it won't surprise you to realise that, as with so many things in the technical sphere, what I do and my title changes a little bit depending on the day of the week. The current title is documentation lead. And what that means from a documentation point of view is that, as well as the, should we say, the day-to-day bread and butter activities of creating documentation or product information, it's actually seen as part of the larger, the broader developer advocacy role. So in other words, when you have a product or service that you're very, very keen for customers to take on board and have a look at, one of the ways of doing that is to talk to developers and to show them the sort of things that the products or services can do, and hopefully to encourage them to try it out and perhaps build some applications and products of their own using that technology. So the documentation that I create is very much oriented towards helping developers, helping customers understand the product, understand the services, see what it can do for them, and to make it as easy as possible for them to try it out.
So IBM has been starting something called design-led documentation. I think in Atlanta, I think there's a team that's set up there. Has that changed the way in which your role or the role of people like you act within IBM, or is that something that may come in the future?
I think it has, absolutely. In fact, over the last couple of months, the documentation team, the developer advocates, have been working closely with the design experts to do exactly that. Having a look at the typical ways in which people will be interacting with the product, what sort of information they'd want to get accordingly, and then designing the documentation development process to reflect that input.
So when does documentation begin? I mean, normally it's at the end. Often in companies, they write the software and then the authors come in to document it. From what you've said, it's not starting when the program is finished, but starting at a different point.
Yes, it's one of the nice characteristics about IBM and certainly Cloudant is there is a very, very good synergy, a very good team relationship with everybody involved with a product delivery. You're quite right, in some organisations there is a tendency for the product to be developed and then handed over to the documentation people to write words about. But with Cloudant, there's no doubt at all that from day one, when you're starting on a new aspect, a new piece of functionality, a new feature, whatever it might be, yes, you've got the software architects, yes, you've got the support people involved, you've got the operational people, and you have the documentation people involved. And part of the reason is so that we can all provide different perspectives and input on everything that's going to be required. It is very much an agile development process, both literally and spiritually, if you like. We very much take on board the fact that we are all participating in the development process and the delivery process. It's entirely possible that somebody in one particular team would spot something that isn't so obvious to another team member. So we all work together and we're all involved right from day one, right the way through to the final delivery point. It's very satisfying from that point of view. You're not seen as a member of a strange team who do wordsmith stuff with quills and so on. You're actually part of everything right from day one.
It's much more holistic. I mean, in case people aren't aware, Agile is really a process of doing lots of small mini projects and seeing how they work and then tweaking and adjusting rather than doing a sort of a big bang, a big long project and having something come out at the end.
Exactly, yes, and a key, exactly as you say, these small blocks of work or iterations or sprints, depending on which agile methodology you use, that's a very important point. And the key thing is that you don't consider yourself to have finished that iteration or sprint until all of the aspects that were planned to take place during that 2-week, 3-week period have been completed, and that includes the documentation.
So if the documentation is not ready,
we haven't completed the iteration.
And Cloudant has the courage to say, right, we stop, we get the documentation done, and only then will we move on to...
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yes.
It's always the case. That's excellent to hear. So what the audience for the documentation that you create, and who is it for? And is it paper, is it PDFs, is it web pages, videos? Who is it for, and what are you different types of audience and types of deliverables?
Okay, so to answer that question, it'll help to prefix a little bit about what Cloudant product is. In a traditional database, you have a schema, you identify the various fields that are going to be available in each of the rows, and you push it into this big, powerful processing engine somewhere. Cloudant is a NoSQL database concept. So you're able to use what in colloquial terms would be a free format collection of data. So it's well-structured formatted data using JSON, and you can basically create a large number of documents structured in any way that you like. Now, a NoSQL database will typically run on a local system. The characteristic of Cloudant that makes it especially interesting is that it is completely distributed. So when you push a document into a Cloudant system, it's actually going to be replicated out throughout the entire cluster. It gives you very high level of resilience, lots of performance benefits. And one of the beauties of Cloudant is that the interaction is using a very straightforward API technology. Simple HTTP calls are fantastic for pushing this data in, getting the data out, and so on. Now, that background is necessary to realize that when we're writing the documentation, what we're doing is providing information for people who are predominantly technical people. They are developers who understand a database or a data requirement. They've got an application that's going to need to process data, perhaps with some distributed access required, mobile access certainly, all of those different things. So they have this particular problem scenario. They want to create an application, and we think that Cloudant provides them with a really interesting, powerful and fun technology for them to use. So the documentation reflects that. There will be some overview material. There will be a little bit of explanation about how the NoSQL concept works from the Cloudant point of view, concepts to do with replication, but that's a comparatively... my camera's gone off again.
You're static. We can hear you, but you're frozen.
Okay, let me just see if I can repair the camera. There we go, I should be back now. Yeah. I don't know why it does that. Technology, eh? Yes, the documentation will include some introductory material to the basic concepts, but we work on the basis that the people who are looking at it will be very, very technically aware. They want to know the nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritty. So as a proportion, you're probably looking about 10 to 20% overview introduction. The remainder, the 60–70%, is going to be fairly detailed reference, API material, troubleshooting, all of the technical details that a real technical person would want to see.
So, and that's mainly web pages.
Sorry, yes, yeah. The standard way of delivering information from IBM is to use Knowledge Center, which is a web page-based technology. From Knowledge Center, you can also produce PDFs directly. So if you do want that, that's available to you. One of the interesting characteristics about Cloudant is that it is based on the Apache CouchDB technology, which is an open source capability, and therefore the documentation that we use and that we supply back into the community must be as portable as possible. So when we're creating documents, although there is the IBM standard for using Deter for internal and external IBM information, we also are very aware of the need to make information available in restructured text format, Markdown as well. So it does produce some interesting challenges in that if we're documenting a concept, how are we going to manage that in terms of creating it using Deter or Markdown or restructured text to make it available as a published form, whether it be as a web page, PDF or whatever.
So Deter is a structured language where you tag or mark information, so you say it's a task or it's a concept or it's a reference. A Markdown is semi-structured and it's telling you this is heading 1 or this is heading 2, this is heading 3. Yeah. Does that mean then that you have a transformation or conversion process that you're doing to take your Deter content and convert it to be Markdown? Is that what's going on?
Yes, there's the quick summary. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And is that the tool that you're using? Is that something that's been developed in-house by IBM? Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because there are other people also looking or talking about that way of offering Markdown and also to people, and also discussions about round tripping. So you could maybe get some people to write in Markdown or some lightweight form, and then be able to suck that information in or squirt that information into Deter as well. Exactly. I take it that everyone's writing in Deter, and then there's the high quality version, and then going down to other versions.
It depends, is the honest answer. If we're getting some input, particularly from developers, yes, we could give them the Deter Open Toolkit and provide them with all the necessary DTDs to go directly into Deter, and that would make our life quite easy. But from the development point of view, they have the concepts, they've got a text-based editor, so to go directly into Markdown or restructured text in some cases is a lot easier and more efficient for them. And from our point of view, that's pretty good as well, because we can bring it into Deter and use that as a basis. So in terms of the information flow, there is a very good interchange between us and the developers, and it'll probably be using Markdown documentation insofar as we're round tripping in that environment. But once we're starting to take things on board for the more formal documentation, that's where the emphasis moves on to Deter, and we're pushing that out as the formal delivery.
So you've got programmers writing content, and then you're editing it, or that's source?
Yeah,
okay.
Very much so.
And the stuff that they're writing, is that just focused on internal, or is that stuff that might be seen for external customers?
Bit of both. Bit of both. So a developer will have a design for the particular component or feature that he's working on. Those notes could sometimes be written using a markdown format to give us a kickstart for the formal documentation. In some ways, you could argue that we as documentation people are helping the developers in terms of thinking through some of the aspects of the architecture that they're working on. So if they've come up with a particular computational component, let's say, and they've got some informational messages, we might be able to help them with checking that the messages make sense, that they haven't missed any of the obvious aspects. It's this external perspective. It's very, very healthy interchange of ideas and flow.
Okay. And going back to working in an agile environment, some authors find it gives them very little time to write the content, and I also have the challenge of attending all the meetings. In practice of getting the information you need and having the time to write the documentation, do you attend all the stand-up meetings and the scrums, and do you have sufficient time to write the content?
Gosh, that's
I mean, no one has enough time. Let's say that. Okay.
Do we have enough time to do everything? No, but we have pretty much as we could hope for. Let's put it that way. In terms of attending the stand-up scrums, no, and there's a very practical reason for that, which is that the development is on a global basis. We have people working over in the States as well as here in the UK. We do have regular meetings, and in fact, the time zone difference can work extremely well for us. So a classic example, such as this morning, I've done some writing yesterday, which I've sent over to the developers in the States. They've looked at it overnight, they've made some changes, I've updated the changes, created a fresh draft which has been sent to them. So we are really benefiting in this particular case from the time zone differences. And then at regular intervals during the week, we will have the equivalent, the virtual equivalent of the stand-up scrum to talk about the hot issues and the sort of things that we're finding.
Okay. Now, you mentioned one of the questions. The next question I've got is about job title, which you told me already, which was I think documentation lead. But if looking back on your profile on LinkedIn, you've had a number of roles within IBM to do with documentation, as well as project management and programming as well. But within the documentation roles, some have been information architect, some have been information developer, I think one was technical writer. Are they one and the same thing, or does IBM do those mean different things and have different roles within IBM in terms of the roles and responsibilities for those types of titles?
They are different. However, the specific local or interpretation, in other words, what the project team it will interpret it as, might vary a little bit. So technical writer, I would say, is the colloquial everyday term for what IBM would formally call an information developer, somebody who spends most of their day Deter wrangling. An information architect is somebody who will take a slightly higher level perspective in terms of what information is going to be required to support the product, the project, what is the best way of making that information available. Do we go web only? Do we go the printed page? How are we going to handle translation issues, accessibility issues, those sorts of things? So perhaps a little less writing, a bit more of the working out what bits fit where would be the information architect role. Information developer, Deter wrangler, doing the word processing bit. Within those very clear definitions from the IBM point of view, you will have local variations in interpreting what they actually mean. So if you've got a comparatively small team, then the role of information architect, information developer would largely be merged into one. If you've got a very big team, you might have a junior information developer, a senior information developer, that sort of thing.
And we've seen this as a trend within other organizations of making the project management person come from a technical documentation perspective, I've got, there you are again. And I noticed you had project lead again as your experience. Is that unique to you, or are there other situations? Is it not unusual for somebody from a documentation role to be the person that's got a project lead role as well?
I would say it's a little unusual in that quite often when I've spoken with information developers inside and indeed outside IBM, my impression is that once you've gone into writing, you tend to stay in the writing field in one form or another. My own particular background is very much on the technical side. I came from a computer science background, and I enjoy very much rolling up my sleeves and tinkering under the hood with the code development. And what that meant was that it was a conscious decision from the career point of view to say, yes, I've done a few years working in the information development, information architecture role, but from time to time it's good to go back to the basics and remind myself about the joys of debugging some Java.
Because you got a DPhil in information systems, if I remember correctly.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, so it's a technical, strongly technical background.
Yes.
Obviously, yes. With that. In terms of a typical day at work for you, is there such a thing? And if so, what would the types of things that you would do within a typical day?
It's hard to say what would be a typical day, but
or typical week, perhaps.
Yeah, well, there are certain things that will tend to happen on a fairly regular basis. Going through the various emails that have arrived overnight from particularly the States to say these are the things we're working on. In my particular role as a documentation lead, I'm probably going to be doing some kind of meetings, presenting some status reports. Fortunately, within Cloudant, that doesn't seem to require too many PowerPoint slides. Verbal reports seem to go down quite well. It's a bit more efficient from that.
Hooray.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely make sure that I'm doing some proper documentation work at least once a day. Again, very important to keep your foot on the ground, as it were, not get too caught up in the minutiae of scheduling and planning. You've got to remind yourself what it's all for, which is producing the information. And as part of that, there will have to be some practical hands-on work. So a classic example is if a new capability is coming into the project, I would absolutely want to try it out myself, so that the examples that I include in the documentation are real examples that I've actually used myself.
Right, okay. And in terms of the pleasure of the job and what you enjoy about because you've done different roles, what's brought you back to doing technical documentation, and maybe interesting stuff that you've done interesting projects in the past. What is it that gives the pleasure, that brings you back to doing technical documentation?
I think fundamentally it's the fact that you as an individual are able to do something that's really going to be valued by the person you are talking to, you are communicating with. If you put yourself in the customer's shoes, they've got a problem, or perhaps they've got an opportunity and they want to make something work, or they want to understand how something works within a system. And what you're doing as a writer is you are sharing your ideas, you are helping them get over an obstacle, or you are helping them realize that this knotty problem that they were trying to solve can actually be done in this particular way, or here are some examples. You're actually tangibly making a direct difference to somebody, and the quality with which you do that, the clarity with which you're communicating, the enthusiasm that you have for the product, the way in which you convey the reality that this really is the best thing since sliced bread for you, that sense of interaction is immensely satisfying. And I think there are so many different ways in which you can get something that is very gratifying when you're working as a writer. So if you're a very technical person, you can enjoy the detailed technical conversion as you go from Deter into HTML using XSL transformations, a real XML coder, if that's the person you want to be. Or you might enjoy the cut and thrust of grammatical syntax fine-tuning because you are somebody who's really keen on literature. That could be for you too. Or just the simple understanding of customer interactions, the psychology, if you like, when you're talking to somebody who is undoubtedly very, very, very intelligent, but perhaps they just don't have the current awareness of the actual product. How do you get that information across to them without being patronizing or insulting, that sort of thing? So if you're interested in individual human psychology, then there's that flavor to it. So I actually, as you can probably tell, I genuinely think that technical communication is one of the best career paths that you could possibly have. And just as a final observation, it's absolutely fantastic because you've got the greatest get out of jail free card imaginable, which is that you are actually allowed to ask really stupid questions.
I think, yes, I mean, a couple of things that, from that, which are common themes, is the pleasure of puzzling things out and the pleasure of communicating. And you're talking about linguistics, it's distilling it down to being as clear and as simple or as succinct as it could possibly be.
Absolutely.
In terms of autonomy, how much control you have over what you do and how you spend your day. As an information developer, technical communicator, do you have much autonomy over what you do and the order in which you do things?
Very much so. The basic principle of Agile and indeed IBM development is you have a particular task that you have been assigned. You've agreed to do it as part of your commitment for that Agile iteration. How you do it is up to you as long as you do it. So if you choose to blitz the entire thing at the beginning of the iteration, terrific. If you want to take your time over it, that's absolutely fine too. It's the delivery at the end that actually counts, and how you manage your time is very much down to you. So a very high level of autonomy.
So many people come into technical communication from another career. So I'd be interested to know what formal training you've. And when we heard about how you come from a development background into it, there's a couple of things I'd be interested in. One is what formal training in the topic of technical communication you've had, but also in terms of IBM, how it recruits and it trains technical communicators, because it's one of the distinctive things about IBM is it does hire graduates and train them up to be information developers as well.
Yes,
so I'd be interested in sort of the training that IBM provides to people that have that role of information developer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's a number of approaches that you can take. One, which is the approach I tended to follow, is as you identify a particular need, I need to know more about X or Y, you go out and find it. You go and find the information, you self-study.
You've frozen again.
Oh, sorry, let's bring the camera back, hopefully. There we go. So yes, you can have a self-study approach, but there is a tremendous portfolio of educational materials available within IBM, which are effectively leading to an internal certification process, and you can follow that. They have a very, very strong mentoring and guidance capability. Everybody has a mentor. You have people who can guide you in terms of the areas to specialize in to help you, to ask questions and so on. Not so much in terms of external courses, and the reason for that is simply because if you have a particular requirement, it's often so specific and so detailed that you want to go directly to that rather than a general introductory type course. But yes, there's a very good educational development career path planning mechanism. In terms of the skills that you should have to be a technical writer generally, and certainly for IBM, it's not so much that you have to be good to begin with, as you have to be interested and passionate about your subject. And if you've got an interest in technology and interest in communications, maybe you've done some blogs or white papers or presented at a conference or something like that, and it particularly worked for you, then it may well be that a career in information development, technical writing, is the sort of thing you could be looking at.
So people that join IBM as information developers, are they from a English degree or a computer science degree, a mixture of science and humanities? Is there a common type of academic background that they come from?
I wouldn't say common. You might have a very slight number of people who are from a literature language background originally, but it's barely statistically significant. It's much more a case of, are you interested in the technology? Are you interested in communicating? Come on board.
Okay. Now, in terms of methodologies and software tools they use to create the documentation, are they in-house proprietary stuff or things that other people can buy? One methodology you've mentioned is Deter. It might be useful to explain in terms of, from your perspective, what Deter means or is for you. But just if there's people are always interested in what tools other technical communicators use.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So the standard documentation development route for IBM is to write stuff using Deter. There is an internal collection of tools, the information development workbench, that enables us to process that Deter into a variety of forms. It's not just to output into HTML, PDF, whatever. It's also used for packaging the Deter files.
You've frozen, I'm afraid.
Sorry.
You've gone black.
There we go. So this workbench can also be used to package the Deter files for translation processing, to run them through automated accessibility checks, and so on. So that workbench is a very, very powerful environment. Because I come from a very technical background, and because I'm working a lot with developers, the actual programmers, my personal preference is I tend to use the Eclipse information development integrated development environment. So Eclipse has an XML editor. It also has the ability to take Oxygen on board, which is a very nice editing tool. So I use Eclipse with Oxygen for editing the Deter files directly. And the fact that I'm using Eclipse means I'm using the same development environment as the majority of developers, which means that we've removed one of the barriers to communication.
And Deter, throw this at you, not a nice question to ask. For those that aren't aware of what Deter is,
what is it?
What is it?
Okay, so Deter is a text-based markup language, and it is XML-based, which means that you have some very specific rules. Everyday analogy, if you take an HTML file, you might be writing some text and you want to have a paragraph, you would have a start paragraph mark and an end paragraph mark. Now Deter is very similar to that, but it's much stricter in terms of the rules that you have to comply with and obey. It constrains you in terms of what you can do for the structure of the information, and the reason is very, very simple. It's to force you into a topic-based documentation way of thinking. So right at the beginning you mentioned how Deter is subdivided down into concepts, tasks and reference material. So if you're writing something that's a concept, an explanation, an overview, then the Deter markup that you're using allows you to do certain things but not others. And that's quite deliberate, because if you're writing a concept, you shouldn't be doing detailed API reference messages, that sort of thing, and vice versa. So Deter is a very rigorous, very well structured way of controlling the structure of the information. The words that you're writing are very much down to you, but you can do so safe in the knowledge that if you're working on a concept or a piece of reference information or a how-to type task, then Deter is actually stopping you from veering off course in terms of the flavour and feel of what you're writing.
So so the benefit in your context is that it's ensuring that the quality of what's written is good, well-structured, consistent content.
Yes, and there's another very, very important point, which is with IBM being such a large organisation and many of the projects having lots of writers, it would be jarring if you're reading a piece of documentation and it suddenly feels as if you can see that you're looking you can see that somebody else wrote that paragraph compared with the previous one. So the importance of consistency, the style, the feel of the documentation, if you like, is really, really important. And Deter is one of the technologies that can help channel everybody into the same way of thinking and expressing their ideas.
Okay. Now, these interviews are with my marketing hat for the ISTC, the Information Institute of Scientific and Technical Communicators. So a couple of questions about that. About if you're a member, I noticed you've got the lanyard from the ISTC's conference.
That's right. Yeah.
Around your neck.
Yes.
So are people in IBM, and are you a member of the ISTC?
I'm not personally, but there are many members of the ISTC within IBM, and IBM, I believe, has a corporate membership of the organisation as a whole.
And in terms of the conference that IBM, that the ISTC does, the TCUK, I think you've spoken and attended the conference.
That's correct. Yes. Yes.
Again, the why question, I suppose. What benefit? What have you? What's prompted you to go to the conference and speak at the conference?
Okay, two things. The first is, even when you're in a large organisation like IBM, with many different writers spread around the world, it's a really good idea, in my personal opinion, it's a really good idea to get out and talk to other people who are facing similar challenges but in a completely different context. Or to put it another way, day one of the conference,
You've frozen.
Yeah, let's get that back. There we go. So day one of the conference, you all get together and it's a collective sort of, well, you'd never believe what I've been working on. How on earth did you manage to solve this particular problem? It's a sharing of the challenges, or dare one say it, the grief sometimes. But once you've got over that initial pooling of the pain, the opportunity to share ideas, to share approaches, to get the latest information in terms of what's happening for the technologies, the standards, that sort of thing. A classic example is in terms of accessibility, making sure that the information we create is accessible to people. That's something that is affected by national and indeed international legislation. It's not something that many people are particularly aware of on an everyday basis when you're a technical writer, but you do need to know it.
So accessibility, you're meaning people with sight impairment or hearing issues or limited motor control as well?
Exactly, yes. We have to be very aware of that for all of the projects that we're working on. And sharing the experiences, the ideas, the insights is very, very helpful, definitely. In terms of actually presenting at the conference, what better way to make sure that you really have mastered your particular subject? If you want to learn something, get to a point where you can go out and teach it or present it, because believe me, when you're facing an audience of specialists like the ISTC, TCUK, my goodness, you've got to be ready for a grilling.
Well, they're a friendly bunch.
Very much so, very much so, yes. But if you don't know your stuff, you will be caught out. So.
The conference is open, I should say, to people listening in. The conference is open to ISTC members and non-members. But if you're a member, it's a lot cheaper to pay to attend than if you're a non-member.
Yes. Highly recommended. It's a really, really great conference.
Yes, it is. Yes, I find it very enjoyable as well. That excuse me. Those are all my questions. I don't know if you've got if there's anything we haven't covered that you'd like to mention, or other topics. I should ask that. I should just check on that.
Well, I think the one thing that I would particularly highlight is there's a tendency for technical communicators and those who call on technical communicators to think in terms of the printed page.
Deliverables, yeah.
I think the future is changing. The spectrum of materials that we will be delivering as technical communicators is increasing dramatically. The very fact that we're recording an interactive interview is in itself a new channel for communication. There is hopefully some useful material in here that people will benefit from. And therefore I think that the role of the technical communicator has already started to change, but we ain't seen nothing yet, to coin a phrase. If you are a writer, think of it as becoming more of a communicator and get used to the idea that you'll want to do more and more in terms of different media types, certainly podcasts, probably videos, animations, those sorts of things. It's an incredibly exciting time to be a technical communicator.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's a lot of people think that they're the people that write manuals, and in fact, that's just a means to an end. End to a means? Means to an end. It's just a deliverable, and most authors are not fast. Whatever does the job, is the thing that it should be produced in. And often the resistance to move away from inches and inches thick worth of documentation to something else, the resistance is coming from outside of the technical communicator. It's somebody else in the organisation that's got a perception that there needs to be X thousands of pages just to be safe.
Exactly.
Great. Well, those are all my questions. So thank you very much for your sharing your expertise and knowledge and your time on this.
It's a great pleasure.
What we'll be doing is uploading this to the ISTC channel on YouTube for people to watch at their leisure. But I'll stop the broadcast at that point and thank you once again, Adrian, for your time.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Stop.